You are looking at the Oklahoma City Memorial Marathon. It's an annual event to remember the victims from the 1995 attack on the Murrah Federal Building. Some of the participants in this race also ran in the Boston Marathon 2 weeks ago, but obviously were unable to finish it because of the bombings. Joining me now around the table, Congressman Bennie Thompson, ranking Democrat on the House Homeland Security Committee, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Democrat from Florida, Republican Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, and Congressman Jason Chaffetz, Republican from Utah, also on the House Homeland Security Committee. Here's what I'm gathering from this show today. In talking to folks in office and out of office, sort of observing from an expert point of view, that actually it doesn't look as though there really were dots that were not connected. It looks as though it worked, even though it ended up horribly. What is your take? Give me your all's takes. We'll start over here on whether you are you troubled by anything, or do you think, basically there was not much more that could have been done?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank the men and women who collectively put the forces together to catch the men. Once you look at it from an oversight standpoint, we should look at exactly what happened. But at this point, trying to point fingers saying the dots weren't connected is a little bit early. Let's get in it, let's review it, and at some point, if there are some things we need to change, let's change them.
A few of the things that have emerged, one is that Tamron was investigated, and when he was investigated, he was actually cleared. So that's why he didn't hit the heightened no-fly list or the heightened watch list. But if it does turn out that they were domestically radicalized, one of the things that we do have to make sure that we do is really fine-tune how we can ferret out radicalization and also attune Americans to, when you see something, say something. And because I think right now, people think internationally, almost exclusively when it comes to terrorism. So we've got to focus in on the potential, like this one, for domestic radicalization.
But let me put it a different way, and that is that, first of all, we know that both the CIA and the FBI were told by Russia, their counterparts, you got to look at this guy. We think he's been radicalized. We think he's a terrorist. Then we have the fact that up came these, at some point after a trip to Russia and before it, up came terrorist videos on his website. And people think, well, wait, we had his name. At least one department, Homeland Security, I believe, knew he had either come or gone to Russia. And he's putting up, in praise of terrorism. Why in the world didn't anybody think, ooh, wait, this is a danger sign?
And I think that, Candy, that is where people do look, is now on the backside, looking at what was seeming to be missed. Number one, the airlines misspelling the name and the FBI saying they didn't pick it up because of the misspelled name. Now, was that a clerical error? Where are we in that process? How is that information share conducted and reviewed? Who's doing the double check? People want to know that. And I think, secondly, when you have the report of the phone call that was intercepted, why did the FBI not go in and deal with these repeated alerts or several alerts?
I'm not sure they knew
from
of the phone
Russia.
Call until the last couple of days.
That's exactly right. But why was
they
it
didn't
not
give it
picked
to
up?
us.
Why was it right? Why was it not?
I mean,
picked up?
well, Russia had it. It was their intercept, the phone call. So they didn't give it to us, which might say that we need better conversations with Russia.
Yeah. Look, in all fairness, we're all cheering on the men and women in the intelligence services, Homeland Security, FBI. I mean, go, go, go. We're all cheering them on. But there are serious questions that we need to look at. Did they share that information with the local Boston officials? I heard one report, I don't know if it's true, as to whether or not the local Boston and Massachusetts authorities knew about this. And the second thing I think we should really look at is people are coming here and claiming asylum, and then they're taking trips back to the region. That should probably raise some red flags. It's something that will obviously be part of the discussion in the months to come.
Sure. I think, though, the other thing is when you go on the internet now, basically if you buy something, if you say something on Facebook, if you Google something, suddenly they know what sort of face soap you're using. And they know, if you have children, whatever. I mean, advertisers I'm talking about at this point. And one wonders why, when some of these videos and some of these curious things that are written on Twitter and elsewhere, wouldn't raise a flag. Like you could just put like a keyword in there that would ping for you all the time, and then you could match it with a database.
Well, the fact is that these things did raise the flags, and that's one of the reasons that he was closely watched and investigated. Now, whether those things rise to the level of a heightened risk, and you tighten up the focus on that individual,
Or at
in
least
this
call
case,
the Boston police.
Well, yeah, precisely. And then the data mining that you're speaking of, Candy, you know, that does trouble people, that they are being data mined for certain information on consumer goods, etc. And then it does cause them to say, okay, you got this ping. Why was this ping? Why did it not trigger other watches through this process with the FBI? Why was there not a review of some of that intel that had been given to us?
Well, I think what you'll find out, Candy, our committee is scheduled to have some oversight hearings on what went on. We also found out that the birth date was input wrong in the computer. Right. So there were some things that didn't mesh that a system wouldn't pick up.
Right.
So
there's
we're
some
going
pilot error here we're talking about, basically.
The input was wrong.
Right.
So what we're going to have to do is figure out, in those instances, what can we do? And it might come down to whether or not we can provide the resources to...
Well, I want to... Go ahead, and then I want to ask you about the resources.
One of the core problems that we have in this country is we have no viable entry-exit system in this country. Now, a lot of this is captured when there's air travel, but when there's travel over the land and on boats and other things, we don't have a viable system. I also worry about giving up every liberty in the name of security. We have a very dangerous line. I don't want my federal government going in and surfing my Facebook page. That is not what we have got to be very, very careful with that.
And let me just ask you, and I've got about a minute in this segment, we'll come back, but you talked about resources. Is there, enough money in these budget-cutting, tax-raising days to make a major commitment, were that to be something that needed to be done after various investigations?
Well, I think once the after-action review and the oversight hearings are held, if in fact it comes down to resources, I see Congress making that commitment. There's no price tag we can put on our security.
I mean, we
got to prioritize
need
things.
To two things. We need to prioritize resources, and we need to make sure that we are tightening up on coordination. Learn from every one of these incidents.
Well, third,
do everything we can to prevent
use
them.
the technology that is available. We should be able to do more with less based on using technologies that are there.
I want you all to hang on for me. We'll be back on the other side of this, and we're going to play a clip from the president's comedic performance at the White House Correspondents' Dinner last night. And wouldn't you know it, there's just a little tinge of politics in what he said.
I'm also hard at work on plans for the Obama Library, and some have suggested that we put it in my birthplace, but I'd rather keep it in the United States.
We are back with 4 members of Congress: Bennie Thompson, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Marsha Blackburn, and Jason Chaffetz. Always a good time. The president has great timing. He's got a second job if he'd like it at some point. But there's always some political sort of jabbing that goes on. And that certainly was one of them. In fact, he looked at the crowd and said, come on, who didn't see that joke coming? Because we do hear a lot of birthplace jokes. But I wanted to play something else, because we had this week all the living presidents at the George W. Bush Library opening, which is really a nice moment when you see all of them together. And the president talked about it in his speech.
I went to the opening of the Bush Presidential Library in Dallas. It was a wonderful event, and that inspired me to get started on my own legacy, which will actually begin by building another edifice right next to the Bush Library. Can we show that, please?
So again, just a little bit of humor and a lot of politics in this. These sorts of things we put together with something else that Joe Biden said. He was out at with John McCain at an appearance on his behalf, and he took a look back at the McCain-Obama race. And here's what he had to say.
Barack knows, I know. Had the economy not collapsed around your ears, John, in the middle of literally just as things were moving, you at least would have, I think you probably would have won, but it would have been incredibly closer. You inherited a really difficult time. You inherited a difficult circumstance.
So who agrees with the vice president? I thought this was just kind of interesting because, you know, politics moves, and no longer does the president find himself able to say, this was George Bush's fault. George Bush, I inherited this. He's in his second term. Now we're looking back and saying, boy, John, if the economy hadn't been so bad, you might have won. First of all, do you agree with Biden?
Well, he's my vice president.
Okay.
Let me tell you.
I'll put you down as a no over here.
I think what we saw this week was an incredible celebration of free speech. You know, when you look at the peaceful transition of power, you look at what happened at the Bush Library, where they came together to celebrate, whether they agree or disagree, they celebrated that. And then, of course, last night with the dinner, the fact that even though I don't like the zingers, I feel like never injure anyone, even in jest. And I don't like those zingers. They make me uncomfortable. But I do appreciate the fact that we can come together and have that political humor.
And we have quite a few examples of that over the last couple of weeks, in tragedy and crisis, as well as in unifying moments that remind us at our core that we're all Americans and that we need to focus, like last night's event does, on the next generation of journalists, the next generation of leaders, and so that we can all focus on what matters the most to us, which is preserving our democracy and lifting people up.
Yeah,
and we can still differ. But we are Americans, you know,
right.
And Americans can differ and still get along in the best interest of this country.
I want to show you a poll that came out this week as well. This is ABC News Washington Post poll. Do you approve or disapprove of the job this person did as president? President Obama, 50% approved. George Bush, 47% approved. They are basically... you know, that's basically a tie at this point. What do you think accounts for that now? That George Bush left office quite unpopular and now is right up there with President Obama.
Oh, I think the further you get away from a presidency, more people are able to look at it objectively. And look, he's a very engaging person. The country, I think, really likes the Bush family. Certainly Barbara Bush was the hit of the whole event. I mean, she's the one that kind of put everybody in the place. And I remember when I first came to Congress, it was John Boehner who said, you know what, we can disagree, but let's just not be disagreeable. And I think that's right. And when our country is unique, just as Marcia said, when you get the presidents, different parties, they're together, all sitting together. That's an amazing American moment.
And we should also add that there was discussion of Boston and a salute to those who covered it, as well as to those the victims of it. And so it wasn't all just, you know, let's get up there.
And Candy, I think that the further you get away from the Bush presidency and with the occurrence of Boston and people thinking about public safety, like in Nashville yesterday at the Country Music Marathon, people appreciate the fact that he was able to define what is the war on terrorism, and that we are fighting an ideology, and that we have to be mindful and putting in place some of the structure that Bennie has referenced that helps us to make this fight.
It's kind of hard not to like a guy who paints people's pets.
That's right. That's right. I've got about a minute left, and I want to ask you, any of you, if you think that what went on in Boston, changes either the outcome of an immigration debate or brings gun control back to the forefront. Do either of those change because of Boston?
Well, I think it says that we need comprehensive immigration reform now more than ever because of Boston.
More impetus. What do you think?
Jason said it a few minutes ago, exit, entry, visas. We need to focus more on making sure that the elements of comprehensive immigration reform are in place so that we can make it less likely these things
an
happen.
impetus more for...
It heightens the awareness for the need for public security and how we share the information from the local, state, federal, and globally.
Absolutely need to fix legal immigration. We have to do that, and we got to look very seriously about how we do visas in this country.
And background checks is a 90-10 issue. We have to return to it and make sure that bad people who shouldn't have them can't get access to guns.
And border security is important, too.
Okay, so a little impetus there is what you see. Listen, thank you all so much. Jason Chavez, Marsha Blackburn, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Bennie Thompson, thank you all for being here this morning so bright and early. When we return, a Boston sports team celebrates opening day and says goodbye to one of their own.